All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're going to objectively unpack the really fascinating evolutionary hypotheses behind human short-term mating. We're looking at this entirely through the lens of evolutionary psychology. So we'll be examining the ancestral logic, the physical clues, and the psychological mechanisms that researchers believe have shaped human mating strategies over millions of years. It's a deep dive into our biological history, and honestly, it starts with a pretty surprising question.
Picture this. You're walking across a college campus, and a very attractive person of the opposite sex walks right up to you and says, "Hi, I've been noticing you around town lately, and I find you very attractive. Would you have sex with me?" How would you actually respond to that? Well, back in 1989, researchers Clark and Hatfield ran this exact experiment in real life to test the differences in male and female mating psychology. And the results they got? They completely fundamentally changed how we understand human behavior.
The results are just jarring. Exactly 0% of the women approached in this study agreed to casual sex with a stranger. Literally zero. Many were actually offended or just totally puzzled by it. But the guys, 75% of the men said yes on the spot. And get this, many of the remaining 25% were actually apologetic about saying no, mentioning they already had a girlfriend or somewhere they had to be. This massive universal psychological divide sets up our entire investigation today. Why on earth is this difference so huge, and why do we see it consistently across totally different cultures? That brings us to Section 1, Men's Evolutionary Logic and the Mathematics of Ancestry. To really get why this divide exists, we've got to rewind way back into our deep ancestral past and look at something called parental investment theory. For our male ancestors, the reproductive math was actually super simple. Think about it. A woman who had sex with dozens of men in a single year could still really only produce one child, right? It requires 9 months of intense internal gestation. But an ancestral man who had short-term encounters with dozens of fertile women, he could potentially produce dozens of children with basically zero biological investment on his end. And this deeply ingrained drive for variety, it's universal. When researchers run massive studies asking unmarried people all over the world how many partners they ideally desire, the divide is crystal clear. Whether you're in North America, the Middle East, East Asia, or even in places with incredibly high gender equality like Norway, men consistently desire significantly more partners than women do. And, this desire also translates directly into time. If a man and a woman have known someone for, say, 5 years, their likelihood of consenting to sex is practically identical. But if you shrink that timeline down to 1 month, 1 week, or even just a single hour, a man's probability of consenting stays remarkably high, while a woman's just drops off a cliff. For ancestral men, letting very little time elapse minimized the effort they needed to put in to gain reproductive success. So evolutionary psychologists point out a few hardwired psychological clues left over from our ancestors that back this up. First, men evolved this powerful emotion of lust to motivate them to seek variety. And for short-term encounters, men significantly lower their standards. Age, intelligence, personality, suddenly those don't matter nearly as much. Then there's the famous closing time phenomenon. Studies actually show that as it gets later and later in a bar, men perceive the remaining women as increasingly attractive. It's literally a mechanism designed to spur action as opportunities start running out. Plus, the data consistently shows that men experience profound sexual regret for missed opportunities, acts of omission, way more than women do. This even extends to visual cues. In one really fascinating experiment, participants had to choose between revealing a potential partner's face or revealing their body. When they were considering a long-term committed relationship, men prioritized seeing the face. But when asked to evaluate a partner for a quick, short-term fling, men totally shifted to prioritizing the body. Why? Because from an evolutionary standpoint, a woman's body provides the most immediate, powerful clues about her current fertility. Now, we know this male strategy exists, but there's a biological footprint here that reveals something completely unexpected. Human testicles are actually over 4 times larger than those of monogamous gorillas, relative to body weight. And in evolutionary biology, larger testes evolve because of sperm competition. That only happens if the sperm of multiple males are inside a female's reproductive tract at the exact same time, which brings us to a massive plot twist in our explainer. Here is Section 2. Women's hidden benefits and the evolutionary plot twist. The twist here is just pure mathematical certainty. Every single time an ancestral man had a consensual, short-term sexual encounter, a woman was doing the exact same thing. Think about it. Male psychology for casual sex simply could not have evolved without the active, willing participation of women at least some of the time. But given the huge costs of pregnancy and the potential reputational damage, there had to be some profound, hidden evolutionary benefits for women to risk short-term mating. So evolutionary psychologists have proposed 5 major categories of benefits ancestral women might have gained. These include resource accrual, securing better genes, mate switching, achieving long-term goals, and mate manipulation. Let's look at a couple of the most prominent theories right now.
One really fascinating concept under the genetic benefits category is called the sexy son hypothesis. The idea is that if an ancestral woman mated with a highly attractive, high-status man, even just briefly, she might bear a son who inherits those exact same traits. That son would then grow up to be highly attractive to women in the next generation. Ultimately, this gives the mother a massive increase in her number of grandchildren. It was a subconscious way of securing superior genetics, especially when a long-term commitment from that high-status male just wasn't an option. Another heavily supported theory is known as mate expulsion. Look, sometimes an ancestral woman's long-term mate might stop providing resources, or become abusive, or just decline in overall mate value. Because affairs so often lead to divorce or separation across all sorts of cultures, a short-term affair could actually serve as a highly effective subconscious mechanism to finally break up with a current partner. It also gave the woman a chance to trade up to a higher quality mate by kind of securing a replacement before totally leaving her current situation.
And the empirical evidence backing up these female-specific hypotheses is seriously compelling. Studies show that when looking for short-term mates, women highly prefer men with symmetrical, masculine features, which are classic markers of good health and good genes. What's more, multiple studies suggest that these specific preferences peak right when a woman is ovulating. Other evidence points to women using casual encounters to evaluate a guy's long-term potential and shows they are significantly more likely to have an affair when they are emotionally or sexually unhappy with their current partner. Moving to Section 3, context changes everything. Because biology is not destiny. We definitely aren't just robots, blindly running a million-year-old software program. Our environment heavily triggers and alters which of these mating strategies we actually deploy in our own lifetimes. Specific environmental triggers can completely flip the switch between long-term and short-term strategies. For instance, growing up without a father present is reliably linked to individuals pursuing short-term mating strategies much earlier in life. Big life transitions, like a divorce, suddenly throw people back into the mating market, temporarily spiking short-term mating as they figure out their new value. And of course, your own perceived mate value, basically how desirable you think you are to the opposite sex, heavily impacts how casually you might treat a sexual encounter.
But honestly, maybe the most powerful environmental trigger of all is just the sex ratio, the actual demographic balance of men to women in a given area. When there's a surplus of men, cultures shift heavily toward long-term mating. We see stable marriages, and sometimes even polyandry, where one woman marries multiple men. But when there is a surplus of women, the culture shifts dramatically toward the male-preferred strategy. That means way more short-term mating, hookups, and casual sex. And that brings us directly to modern life. The source material points out that the huge rise of hookup culture on a lot of college campuses today can actually be traced back to a surplus of women in those specific mating pools. Right now, more women than men are enrolling in and graduating from universities. That demographic imbalance creates a surplus of women in the college dating scene, which, according to evolutionary psychology, is a primary driver behind modern campus hookup culture. The environment is quite literally unlocking the ancient strategy. So, that leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to wrap up today's explainer. The research notes that dating apps like Tinder and Snapchat reflect these exact same ancient sex differences. Men tend to use them more for casual access, while women are often hoping they lead to longer-term commitments. So as we swipe and snap our way through romance today, the really big question is this: how exactly is our million-year-old psychological wiring navigating a modern digital mating market that our ancestors could never have even comprehended? Are we actually mastering the technology, or is the technology just optimizing our most ancient evolutionary instincts? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.